On this beautiful day, we want to greet everyone with a good morning in the peace of our Lord and Savior Jesus. I hope you have been doing well. We are happy to be with you. Continuing our study on the nation of Israel, from its beginnings with Abraham to the present day, today we will be talking about Joseph is hated by his brothers, in the fourth part of this topic. I am Fremont Habitsreuter, but we will be using an artificial voice. Joseph is hated by his brothers. The story of Joseph is found in the book of Genesis, specifically in chapters 37 to 50. The narrative begins with Joseph at the age of 17, living with his brothers and helping to tend the flock. It is in this biblical book that his life is detailed, his prophetic dreams, being sold to the Ishmaelites by his brothers out of jealousy, his rise as a ruler in Egypt, and his reunion with his family. When we think of the patriarchs, we probably think of the following. A. Abraham, the man of faith. B. Isaac, the son of promise. C. Jacob, the father of the 12 tribes of Israel. However, consider this about the patriarch Joseph: he is given more space in Genesis than the others. There is not a single word of reproach against Joseph. In fact, Joseph's character is worth a careful study. The nobility of Joseph's character, his purity of heart and life, the magnanimity of Joseph as a ruler and brother. Let us go through the life of Joseph and remember the wonderful character displayed by this man of God. Let's begin with Joseph as a son in Canaan. Joseph is hated by his brothers, who called him Joseph the Dreamer. That Joseph told his father of the bad reputation of his brothers did not help him, but instead made his situation with them even more difficult. Normally, when we try to do things the right way, we pay a price for it. Genesis, chapter 37, verse 2. This is the story of Jacob. When Joseph was 17 years old, he used to tend the flocks with his brothers. Being still young, he would accompany the sons of Bilhah and the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives, and bring bad reports about them to his father. The favoritism of his father certainly hurt his brothers, for Israel loved Joseph more than all his other sons. Genesis, chapter 37, verses 3 and 4, 3. Now Israel loved Joseph more than all his other sons, because he was the son of his old age, and he made him a richly ornamented coat. For when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his other sons, they hated him and could not speak a kind word to him. Joseph told his brothers about his dreams, and because of those dreams, his brothers began to hate him even more. Genesis, chapter 37, verses 5 to 11, Joseph had a dream and told it to his brothers, so they hated him even more. He said to them, "Please listen to the dream I had. We were binding sheaves in the field, and suddenly my sheaf rose and stood upright, while your sheaves gathered around it and bowed down to mine." His brothers said to him, "Do you intend to reign over us? Will you actually rule us?" And they hated him all the more because of his dreams and what he had said. Then Joseph had another dream, and he told it to his brothers. "Listen," he said, "I had another dream, and this time the sun, the moon, and 11 stars were bowing down to me." When he told his father as well as his brothers, his father rebuked him and said, "What is this dream you had? Will your mother and I and your brothers actually come and bow down to the ground before you?" His brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the matter in mind. Eventually, Joseph's brothers sold him as a slave for 30 pieces of silver. Afterward, he was sold in Egypt, where he was bought by Potiphar, the officer of Pharaoh, captain of the guard. Genesis, chapter 37, verses 12 to 36, 12. As the brothers went to feed their father's flock in Shechem, 13. Israel said to Joseph, "Are not your brothers feeding the flock in Shechem? Come, for I will send you to them." 14. Israel said, "Go now and see if it is well with your brothers and with the flock, and bring me news." So he sent him out of the valley of Hebron, and he went to Shechem. 15. And a man found Joseph, who was wandering in the field, and asked him, "What are you looking for?" 16. He answered, "I am looking for my brothers. Can you please tell me where they are grazing the flock?" 17. The man answered, "They have gone away from here. I heard when they said, 'Let us go to Dothan.'" Then Joseph followed after the brothers and found them in Dothan. 18 From afar they saw him, and before he came they plotted against him to kill him. 19 They said to one another, Here comes the great dreamer. 20 Come, then, now, let us kill him and throw his body into one of these cisterns. We'll say that a wild animal devours you. 21 But Reuben, when he heard this, delivered him out of their hands and said, Let us not take his life. 22 Reuben said, Do not shed blood. Throw the boy into that cistern that is in the desert, and do him no harm. Reuben said this to deliver him from them, to bring him back to his father. 23 But as soon as Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped him of his tunic, the long-sleeved robe that he wore. 24 And threw him into the cistern. The cistern was empty, without water. 25 Then they sat down to eat. And they looked up, and saw that a caravan of Ishmaelites was coming from Gilead. Their camels brought spices, balsam, and myrrh, which they carried to Egypt. 26 Then Judah said to his brothers, What will we gain if we kill our brother and then hide his death? 27 Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites. Let us not harm him, for he is our brother, he is of our blood. 28 And when the Midianite merchants passed by, Joseph's brothers took him out of the cistern and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 pieces of silver. And the Ishmaelites carried Joseph away into Egypt. 29 When Reuben returned to the cistern, behold, Joseph was not in it. Then he tore his clothes. 30 And he returned to his brothers, and said, The boy is no longer there. And now, what am I going to do? 31 Then they took Joseph's tunic, killed a goat, and dipped the tunic in blood. 32 And they sent the long-sleeved tunic to the father with this message. We found this, see whether it is his son's tunic or not. 33 He recognized it, and said, It is my son's tunic. A wild animal devoured him. Surely Joseph was torn to pieces. 34 Then Jacob tore his clothes, put on sackcloth, and mourned for his son for many days. 35 All his sons and all his daughters came to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted and said, weeping, I will go down to the grave to my son. And he continued to weep for his son. 36 Meanwhile, in Egypt, the Midianites sold Joseph to Potiphar, Pharaoh's officer, commander of the guard. Joseph was initially saved by Reuben, who intended to free him. Then, Joseph was saved from death by his brother Judah, who suggested slavery instead of death. Joseph was faithful to his father. Some children rebel against their parents to gain the approval of their brothers, but Joseph remained faithful to his father, willing to obey his wishes. Genesis, chapter 37, verse 13, Israel said to Joseph, Are not your brothers feeding the flock in Shechem? Come, for I will send you to them. Joseph answered, Here I am. One might think that the mistreatment Joseph suffered from his brothers, and the separation from his homeland, the land where he lived, and the separation from his relatives and family, could have produced bitterness and despair in such a young man. Yet, Joseph's character continued to shine even as a slave in Egypt. Let us study Joseph as an administrator in Potiphar's house. Blessed by God, Joseph found favor in Potiphar's eyes. Genesis, chapter 39, verses 1-6, 1 Joseph was taken to Egypt, and Potiphar, Pharaoh's officer, commander of the guard, an Egyptian, bought him from the Ishmaelites who had brought him there. 2 The Lord God was with Joseph, who became a prosperous man and was in the house of his Egyptian master. 3 Potiphar saw that the Lord was with Joseph, and that everything he did the Lord prospered in his hands. For so Joseph found favor in the eyes of his owner and served him. And he made Joseph the steward of his house, and gave him all that he had. 5 And since Potiphar made him steward of his house, and put in charge of all that he had, the Lord blessed the house of the Egyptian for Joseph's sake. The blessing of the Lord was upon all that he had, both at home and in the field. 6 Potiphar committed all that he had into Joseph's hands, so that he cared about nothing but the bread he ate. Joseph had a handsome bearing and good looks. Although Joseph was young, he showed himself to be hardworking and trustworthy. Joseph did the best he could in the situation he was in, and God blessed both Joseph and Potiphar. Joseph was good-looking, and as a result, he was tempted by Potiphar's wife. Genesis, chapter 39, verses 6-20, 6 Potiphar entrusted everything he had to Joseph, so that he was not concerned about anything except the food he ate. Joseph was handsome and handsome. 7 After some time, Potiphar's wife looked at Joseph and said to him, "Come and sleep with me." 8 But he refused and said to his master's wife, "Listen, my master does not care about anything in this house, because I am here, everything he has given to me. 9 There is no one in this house who is above me. He has kept nothing from me except you, because you are his wife. How then could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God?" 10 She spoke to Joseph every day, but he would not listen to her. He would not go to bed with her or stay near her. 11 One day, however, Joseph went into the house to do his work, and no one in the house was there. 12 She grabbed him by his cloak and said, "Come to bed with me." But he left his cloak in her hand and ran outside. 13 When she saw that Joseph had run out and had left his cloak in her hand, 14 She called to the men of her house and said to them, "Look! My husband brought this Hebrew to us to humiliate us. He came into my room, wanting to take me to bed, but I screamed at the top of my voice." 15 When he heard that I was raising my voice and shouting, he left his clothes beside me and ran outside. 16 She kept Joseph's clothes by her until his master came home. 17 Then she spoke to him in the same way, saying, "The Hebrew slave you brought to us came into my room to humiliate me." 18 But when I raised my voice and shouted, he left his clothes beside me and ran outside. 19 When his master heard the words of his wife, who said to him, "This is how your slave treated me," he became angry. 20 And Joseph's master took him and threw him into prison, into the place where the king's prisoners were confined, and Joseph was kept there in prison. Potiphar's wife tried repeatedly to seduce Joseph, but he resisted, remaining faithful to Potiphar and to God. Potiphar's wife was rejected by Joseph, and out of spite, she falsely accused him. This angered Potiphar, and as a result, Joseph was thrown into prison. Joseph as a supervisor in Pharaoh's prison. Blessed by God, Joseph was favored by the chief jailer. Genesis, chapter 39, verses 21 to 23, 21 But the Lord was with Joseph and showed him kindness and gave him favor in the eyes of the jailer. 22 The jailer put all the prisoners in the prison under Joseph's care. And Joseph did all that was to be done there. 23 The jailer did not care about anything that had been put into Joseph's hand, because the Lord was with him, and whatever he did the Lord made successful. Joseph was put in charge of the other prisoners, with complete trust. Joseph was prospered by God in his new role in prison, for God was with him. Joseph was placed in charge of the other prisoners, with complete confidence. Joseph was prospered by God in his new role in prison, because God was with him. Joseph interpreted the dreams of the cupbearer and the baker, acknowledging God as the interpreter. Genesis chapter 40, verses 5 to 22, 5 And they both dreamed, each one his dream, in the same night, each dream with its own meaning, the cupbearer and the baker of the king of Egypt, who were in prison. 6 When Joseph came in the morning and saw them, behold, they were troubled. 7 Then he asked Pharaoh's officials who were with him in the prison of his master's house, "Why do you look so sad today?" 8 They answered, "We had a dream, and there is no one to interpret it." Joseph said to them, "Do not interpretations belong to God? Tell me your dream." 9 Then the chief cupbearer told Joseph his dream. He said, "In my dream there was a vine before me, 10 And on the vine were 3 branches. When the vine budded, there were blossoms, and its clusters produced ripe grapes. 11 Pharaoh's cup was in my hand. I took the grapes and squeezed them into Pharaoh's cup, and I gave it to Pharaoh." 12 Then Joseph said, "This is the interpretation of the dream, the 3 branches represent 3 days. 13 Within 3 days Pharaoh will rehabilitate you and reinstate you to your office, and you will give the cup into his hand, according to the former custom when you were his cupbearer. 14 But remember me when everything goes well for you. Please be kind to me and speak to Pharaoh about me and release me from this prison. 15 For I was indeed stolen from the land of the Hebrews, and here I have done nothing, that they should put me in this dungeon. 16 When the chief baker saw that the interpretation was good, he said to Joseph, I also dreamed, and behold, 3 baskets of white bread were on my head. 17 In the topmost basket were all kinds of food that a baker makes for Pharaoh. And the birds were eating from the basket that was on my head. 18 Then Joseph said, This is the interpretation of the dream, the 3 baskets represent 3 days. 19 Within 3 days Pharaoh will cut off your head and hang you on a tree, and the birds will eat your flesh. 20 On the 3rd day, which was Pharaoh's birthday, he gave a feast for all his servants. And in the midst of them he rehabilitated the chief cupbearer and condemned the chief baker. 21 He reinstated the chief cupbearer in his office, where he had given the cup to Pharaoh. 22 But he had the chief baker hanged, as Joseph had interpreted. The dreams that Joseph interpreted came true, but he was forgotten. Genesis chapter 40, verse 23 But the chief cupbearer did not remember Joseph, he forgot him. Joseph interpreted the dreams, and he was forgotten for a time, but then he was remembered. Genesis chapter 41, verse 1 through 32, 1 After 2 full years had passed, Pharaoh had a dream, behold, he was standing by the Nile River. 2 Out of the river came up 7 cows, good-looking and fat, and they were feeding among the reeds. 3 And after them came up out of the river 7 other cows, ugly and thin, and they stopped by the first ones, on the bank of the river. For the ugly and thin cows swallowed up the 7 good-looking and fat cows. Then Pharaoh woke up, 5 And went back to sleep and had another dream. On one stalk came 7 full and good ears, 6 And after them came 7 thin ears that were scorched by the east wind. 7 The thin ears swallowed up the 7 full and full ears. Then Pharaoh woke up. It had been a dream. 8 In the morning, when he woke up in great distress, he sent for all the magicians of Egypt and all its wise men. He told them his dreams, but there was no one who could give the interpretation. 9 Then the chief cupbearer said to Pharaoh, Today I remember my transgressions. 10 When Pharaoh was angry with his servants and put me and the chief baker in prison in the house of the captain of the guard. 11 We had a dream that night, he and I. We dreamed, and each dream had its own meaning. 12 There was a young Hebrew man with us, a slave of the captain of the guard. We told him our dreams, and he gave us the interpretation, to each according to his dream. 13 And just as he interpreted to us, so it happened, I was restored to my position, and the other was hanged. 14 Then Pharaoh sent for Joseph, and they hurried him out of the dungeon. He shaved and changed his clothes and went in to Pharaoh. 15 And Pharaoh said to him, I have had a dream, and there is no one to interpret it. But I have heard about you that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it. 16 Joseph answered, It is not in me, but God will give Pharaoh a favorable answer. 17 Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, In my dream, I was standing on the bank of the Nile. 18 And behold, 7 fat and well-fed cows came up and grazed among the reeds. 19 And after them came up other cows, weak, very ugly and thin. I had never seen such ugly cows in all the land of Egypt. 20 And the thin and ill-fed cows devoured the first 7 fat cows. 21 And when they had swallowed them, they did not appear to have devoured them, for their appearance remained as bad as at the beginning. Then I woke up. 22 Then I saw in my dream, and there were 7 heads of grain on one stalk, full and good. 23 After them came 7 heads of grain, dry and shriveled, and scorched by the east wind. 24 The 7 thin heads of grain devoured the 7 good heads of grain. I told this to the magicians, but no one was able to give me the interpretation. 25 Then Joseph answered, Pharaoh's dream is only one, God has revealed to Pharaoh what he will do. 26 The 7 good cows will be 7 years, the 7 good ears, also 7 years. The dream is one. 27 The 7 thin and ugly cows that came up after the first will be 7 years, and the 7 thin heads of grain that were scorched by the east wind will be 7 years of famine. 28 This is the word, as I have just spoken to Pharaoh. God has made known to Pharaoh what he is going to do. 29 Behold, there are coming 7 years of great plenty throughout all the land of Egypt. 30 Then there will come 7 years of famine. All that abundance will be forgotten in the land of Egypt, and famine will consume the land. 31 And the plenty will not be remembered in the land because of the famine that will follow, for it will be very severe. 32 Pharaoh's dream was repeated, because the thing is established by God, and God hastens to do it. Joseph gave advice on how to act on the fulfillment of dreams. Genesis, chapter 41, verses 33 to 36. 33 Now Pharaoh was to choose a wise and understanding man and put him in charge of the land of Egypt. 34 This is what Pharaoh was to do. He was to appoint administrators over the land and gather a fifth of the produce of the land of Egypt during the 7 years of plenty. 35 These administrators were to gather all the produce of the good years to come, and to gather grain at Pharaoh's command for food in the cities and store it in storehouses. 36 So the food would be enough to supply the land during the 7 years of famine in Egypt, so that the land would not be destroyed by famine. Joseph authority over Egypt Genesis chapter 41 verses 37 to 41. 37 The advice pleased Pharaoh and all his officials. 38 Then Pharaoh asked his officials, Can we find anyone better than Joseph, a man in whom is the Spirit of God? 39 Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, Since God has revealed all this to you, and there is no one as wise and prudent as you, 40 You will be the manager of my house, and all my people will obey your word. Only on the throne will I be greater than you. 41 And Pharaoh said moreover to Joseph, Behold, I have made you ruler over all the land of Egypt. Joseph was falsely accused and then forgotten by men. Many might ask, why bother being fair? But Joseph maintained his integrity and was not forgotten by God. Just as Joseph found favor in the eyes of Potiphar and the prison warden, he also found favor in the eyes of Pharaoh, and so it is with us if we are faithful. I hope that the study of Joseph is hated by his brothers has been a blessing, and that we can learn more from this character, who left us so many beautiful examples. Normally, we only look at the negative aspects, but God allowed all this to be written so that we can see that all the men in the Bible also made mistakes, and through that, we learn that when we err and ask for forgiveness, there is also forgiveness for us. I wish you all God's richest blessings.